The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the weathered general store just as the first snowflakes began to fall, and Clara Sutton pressed her gloved hand against the frost-covered window, her heart sinking as she realized the building before her was not the comfortable home she had been promised in those carefully penned letters. The driver, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained whiskers, opened the door and offered his hand. "Miss Sutton, we have arrived in Fort Stockton, Texas. Though I must say this weather is not typical for these parts. December can be cold, but snow like this, I have not seen such a thing in 20 years." Clara gathered her burgundy skirts and stepped down onto the frozen ground, her worn boots crunching on the thin layer of ice already forming. The year was 1883, and she had traveled over 1,000 miles from Boston to marry a rancher named Thomas Whitfield, a man she knew only through correspondence. Her trunk followed, thudding onto the hard earth with a finality that made her stomach clench. "Where might I find Mr. Whitfield?" she asked, pulling her wool cloak tighter around her shoulders. The wind had picked up considerably, and the snow was falling faster now, thick flakes that obscured the buildings across the dusty street. The driver's expression changed, something like pity crossing his weathered features. "That is what I was meaning to tell you, miss. Thomas Whitfield died 3 weeks ago. Kicked by a horse, they say. Died the next day from his injuries. I am sorry you came all this way for nothing." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She stood frozen, not from the cold but from the shock of it. Everything she owned was in that trunk. She had spent her last dollars on the train ticket west. Her only living relative, an aunt in Boston, had made it clear there was no room for Clara in her cramped boarding house. This marriage had been her only option, her only hope for a future. "But surely there must be someone who can help," she said, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "Is there a boarding house? A place where I might stay until I can make arrangements?" The driver shook his head slowly. "Miss, I hate to be the bearer of more bad news, but this storm is going to get worse. Much worse. The general store there, old Mrs. Patterson runs it. She might let you shelter inside, but she lives above the shop with her son and his family. There is not much room." He glanced at the darkening sky. "I need to get the horses stabled and find shelter myself before this blizzard truly hits." Clara felt panic rising in her chest. "A blizzard here in Texas? Like I said, miss, I have not seen weather like this in 2 decades, but I know what is coming. The animals know it too. Look at them." He gestured to the horses, who were stamping nervously, their breath forming great clouds in the frigid air. Before Clara could respond, the driver had hauled her trunk to the covered boardwalk in front of the general store and tipped his hat. "Good luck to you, miss. I truly am sorry." Then he was gone, urging the horses down the street toward what she assumed was the livery stable. Clara stood alone on the boardwalk, watching as the few people still on the street hurried to their destinations. The sky had turned an ominous gray-white, and the wind carried the snow in horizontal sheets. She tried the door of the general store and found it locked, a hastily written sign in the window. "Closed due to weather. Storm coming." Fighting down the urge to cry, Clara looked up and down the street. Most of the buildings were dark. A saloon at the far end still showed light, but she could not bring herself to seek shelter in such a place. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "A respectable woman does not enter a saloon." Then she saw it, a small church at the edge of town, its white steeple barely visible through the falling snow. It was perhaps 300 yards away, but it looked sturdy, and surely a church would offer sanctuary. Clara grabbed the handle of her trunk and began dragging it through the snow. The journey that should have taken mere minutes stretched into an eternity. The wind fought her for every step, and the trunk kept catching on the uneven ground. Her hands, even in gloves, were going numb. Snow caked her eyelashes and soaked through her cloak. By the time she reached the church steps, she was gasping for breath and shaking uncontrollably. The church door was unlocked, thank God. Clara hauled her trunk inside and collapsed on a pew, her whole body trembling. The interior was simple. Rows of wooden benches, a modest altar, and a pot-bellied stove in the corner that held only cold ashes. She knew she needed to build a fire, but for a moment, she could only sit and try to process the nightmare her life had become. Outside, the wind shrieked like a living thing. Snow was already piling against the windows. Clara forced herself to stand and investigate. A small room behind the altar held some supplies, a box of matches, a few pieces of wood, and several thick blankets that smelled of mothballs. She managed to get a fire started in the stove, though her hands shook so badly it took several attempts. As warmth began to seep back into the small building, Clara wrapped herself in one of the blankets and allowed herself to cry. What was she going to do? She was trapped in a strange town in a church during what appeared to be a historic blizzard. The man she had come to marry was dead. She had no money, no friends, and no prospects. She must have dozed off from exhaustion because when she woke, the light coming through the windows had changed. It was dim and gray, and the snow was falling so thickly she could not see more than a few feet beyond the glass. The wind rattled the walls with such force she feared the building might collapse. She fed more wood into the stove, grateful to find a small stockpile behind the back room, and realized with growing dread that she had no food and no water. There was snow, of course. Clara opened the door just wide enough to scoop some into a tin cup she found in the supply room, then held it near the stove until it melted. The water tasted clean enough, and it eased her parched throat, but it did nothing for the gnawing hunger in her belly. Hours passed. Clara explored every corner of the small church, finding a Bible, a few hymnals, and little else. She read by the light of the fire, trying to distract herself from her dire circumstances. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to be growing worse. Night fell, and the darkness was absolute. The wind screamed and howled, and snow drifted so high against the door she wondered if she would be able to open it come morning. Clara wrapped herself in all 3 blankets and huddled close to the stove, feeding it wood whenever the temperature began to drop. She thought about her life in Boston, her work as a seamstress in a cramped factory, the tiny room she had rented with 2 other girls. It had not been much, but at least it had been familiar. She thought about the letters from Thomas Whitfield, his promises of a ranch house with a view of the hills, of a good life in Texas where the sun always shone. Those letters were in her trunk, tied with a ribbon, and now they meant nothing. The man who wrote them was dead, and she was going to die too, frozen in a church in a town where no one knew her name. On the second day, Clara woke to find the fire had nearly died. She fed it the last of the wood from the supply room and realized with growing terror that she would run out soon. The storm had not lessened. Snow was piled halfway up the windows now. She was entombed in white. Hunger gnawed at her constantly. She melted more snow for water and tried not to think about food. Her body felt weak, her thoughts scattered. She prayed, though she was not certain anyone was listening. She prayed for the storm to end. She prayed for rescue. She prayed for forgiveness for all the times she had complained about her life in Boston, not realizing how much worse things could become. By the 3rd day, Clara was burning the wooden benches to stay warm. She felt guilty destroying church property, but survival outweighed propriety. She was so weak from hunger that merely walking across the room left her dizzy. The storm continued without mercy. She was breaking apart another pew, struggling with the frozen, stubborn wood, when she heard something that made her heart stop. the sound of a horse neighing outside. Clara scrambled to the window and wiped away the frost with her numb fingers. Through the swirling snow, she could barely make out a shape, a man on horseback, moving slowly down what used to be the main street. He was bundled in heavy clothing, his hat pulled low, leading his horse rather than riding it. The animal's legs were sinking deep into the snow with each step. Clara ran to the door and tried to push it open, but the snow had drifted too high. She threw her weight against it again and again until finally it opened just enough for her to squeeze through. The cold hit her like a wall, stealing her breath. "Help!" She screamed, but the wind tore the word away. "Please help me." The man was moving away from her, heading toward the far end of town. Clara stumbled down the church steps and into the snow. It came up to her knees, and each step was a battle. Her weak body protested, but desperation drove her forward. "Please," she cried again. "I am here, at the church." This time he must have heard something because he turned. Even through the snow, she could see his surprise. He immediately began making his way toward her, pulling the reluctant horse behind him. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" he shouted when he got close enough. His voice was deep and rough, his face mostly hidden behind a thick scarf. "I am trapped," Clara said, and then her legs gave out. She would have fallen face first into the snow if he had not caught her. His arms were strong, and even through all the layers of clothing, she could feel the solid warmth of him. "How long have you been here?" he demanded, already carrying her back toward the church. His horse followed without being led. 3 days, she managed. "No food, I was burning the benches." He cursed under his breath, words her mother would have washed her mouth out for knowing, and carried her up the church steps. He had to set her down to force the door open wider, then pulled her and his horse inside. The animal filled the small space with its bulk and heat. The man unwrapped the scarf from his face, and Clara got her first clear look at him. He was perhaps 30 years old, with a strong jaw dark with several days' worth of beard, and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was weathered and handsome in a rough way, and there was a scar above his left eyebrow. "My name is Harrison Maddox," he said, his hands already working to strip the saddle from his horse. "I ride for the Double R Ranch about 15 miles north of here." "What is your name, Miss?" "Clara Sutton," she replied, her teeth chattering. "I came from Boston. I was supposed to marry Thomas Whitfield, but he died, and then the storm came and the stagecoach driver left me, and I had nowhere else to go." Harrison's expression softened slightly. "I heard about Whitfield. That is a tough piece of luck." He pulled a bedroll from behind his saddle and then, to her amazement, produced a cloth-wrapped package. "I have some jerky and hardtack here. It is not much, but it is food." Clara could have kissed him. She tore into the jerky with unladylike enthusiasm, not caring how she looked. The salted meat was tough and required serious chewing, but it was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. Harrison got the fire built up again, using wood he had brought in the saddlebags. "I was riding to check on some cattle that got separated from the herd before the storm hit," he explained as he worked. "Found them dead, frozen solid. I should have turned back yesterday, but I thought I saw smoke from town and wanted to make sure people were all right." He glanced at her. "I am glad I did." "Why did you risk your life?" Clara asked. "You could have died out there." "People in these parts look after each other," Harrison said simply. "Besides, my horse is tough and I know how to read weather. I figured I could make it." He frowned at the horse, which was steaming in the warmth of the church. "Of course, I did not expect to find a half-frozen mail-order bride burning church benches to stay alive." There was no judgment in his tone, almost something like humor, and Clara found herself smiling despite everything. "I will pay for the benches once I have money. assuming I survive long enough to earn any money, which seems questionable at present. You will survive, Harrison said firmly. This storm cannot last forever. Another day, maybe two, and it will blow itself out. How can you be certain? I cannot. But I have lived in Texas all my life, and even the worst storms end eventually. He pulled a small pot from his pack and scooped it full of snow, then set it on top of the stove. We will melt this for the horse. Animals need water same as people. Clara watched him work with quiet efficiency. Everything about him spoke of competence and strength. He moved with the easy grace of someone accustomed to physical labor, and there was something reassuring about his presence. For the first time in 3 days, she felt like she might actually live through this. "So you are a cowboy?" she asked, more to fill the silence than anything. "Ranch hand," he corrected. "Though I suppose cowboy is not wrong. I work with cattle, mend fences, break horses, whatever needs doing." "It is good work, honest work." "Do you live on the ranch?" "I have a small cabin there, yes. Nothing fancy, but it keeps the rain off my head." He glanced at her. "What were you planning to do in Fort Stockton? Assuming Whitfield had still been alive, I mean." "Be a wife," Clara said. "Keep his house, cook his meals, bear his children. The usual things wives do." "Did you love him?" The question was direct, almost invasive, but there was genuine curiosity in Harrison's gray eyes, no mockery. Clara considered lying, then decided there was no point. "I never met him. We corresponded for 4 months. His letters were kind. That was enough." "You were going to marry a stranger." Harrison sounded incredulous. "I did not have many choices," Clara said, feeling defensive. "I was working in a factory for wages that barely paid for a third of a room and 1 meal a day. My parents are both dead. My aunt made it clear I was a burden. When Mr. Whitfield's advertisement appeared in the matrimonial news, it seemed like providence. A new life in a new place with a man who wanted a wife. It was more than I had in Boston." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "I am sorry," he said finally. "That is a hard situation, but marrying a man you do not know, coming all this way, that took courage." "Or desperation," Clara said softly. "Sometimes they are the same thing." Night fell again, and the storm raged on. Harrison fashioned a makeshift stall for his horse using broken pews, giving the animal some space away from the fire. He shared more of his food with Clara, and she felt strength returning to her body. They sat together near the stove, wrapped in blankets, and talked. Harrison told her about growing up on a small farm in East Texas, about losing both parents to yellow fever when he was 16, about working his way west and learning the cattle trade. He spoke of long days in the saddle, of cattle drives and river crossings, of the satisfaction of good work well done. Clara told him about Boston, about the factory where she had sewn buttons on shirts for 12 hours a day, about the cold walk home through dirty streets, about the small dreams she had nurtured of something better. She told him about her mother, who had died of consumption 2 years ago, and her father, who had drunk himself to death shortly after. "You have had a hard life," Harrison observed. "No harder than most," Clara replied. "Easier than many. At least I could read and write. My mother insisted on that, even though it cost money we did not have for lessons. Reading and writing are good skills, valuable. They got me Thomas Whitfield's letters." Clara smiled wryly. "Though I am beginning to think being illiterate might have been an advantage." Harrison actually laughed at that, a warm, rough sound. "Things have a way of working out. Maybe not the way we plan, but they work out." "You really believe that?" "I have to. Otherwise, what is the point?" Clara found herself studying his face in the firelight. He had laugh lines around his eyes despite his young age, and there was something solid about him, something trustworthy. She felt safe with him in a way she had not expected to feel safe with anyone. "Why have you never married?" she asked suddenly. Harrison looked surprised by the question. "Who says I have not?" Clara felt her stomach drop. "Oh, I am sorry, I should not have assumed." "I am teasing you," he said, that almost smile returning. "I have never married, never really had the chance. Ranch life is lonely. Most women do not want to be stuck out on a spread miles from town with only cows and a dusty cowboy for company." "Some might," Clara said before she could stop herself. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something electric and unexpected. Harrison looked away first, clearing his throat. "You should get some sleep. Tomorrow might be a better day." Clara nodded and arranged herself on the floor near the stove, wrapped in blankets. Harrison took the first watch, tending the fire and checking on his horse. She watched him through half-closed eyes, this stranger who had ridden through a blizzard and saved her life, and felt something stirring in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude. She woke once during the night to find Harrison asleep sitting up against the wall, his rifle across his lap. Even in sleep, he looked alert, ready to wake at the first sign of trouble. Clara added wood to the fire as quietly as she could, then settled back into her blankets. The fourth day of the storm dawned gray and cold, but Clara thought perhaps the wind had lessened slightly. Harrison confirmed her impression. "It is dying down. Another day and we will be able to get out of here." "Where will I go?" Clara asked, voicing the fear that had kept her awake much of the night. "I have no money, no prospects. The man I was supposed to marry is dead." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, pouring water into the pot for coffee. He had produced real coffee beans from his seemingly endless saddlebags, and the smell alone was enough to make Clara's mouth water. "The double R is always looking for help," he said finally. "The owner's wife, Mrs. Richardson, she is a good woman. She might have worked for you. Cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. It would not pay much, but you would have a place to stay and food to eat. You would do that for me. Ask on my behalf. I would." He handed her a tin cup of hot coffee. "You came all this way for a new life. Seems wrong to let you fail before you even get started." Clara wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "You do not know me," Harrison shrugged. "Out here we take care of each other. Besides, you remind me of someone. My mother, maybe. She was small like you, but tough. Never complained even when things got hard. She would have liked you." It was such a simple statement, but it made Clara's eyes sting with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. They spent the day talking more, sharing stories and dreams. Harrison told her about his hope to one day own his own ranch, a small spread where he could raise cattle and horses. Clara told him about her love of books, how she used to save every spare penny to buy used novels from the second-hand shop, how she would read by candlelight long into the night. "What kind of books?" Harrison asked. "Adventure stories, mostly. Tales of people doing brave things, going to exotic places. I know it is silly, but I liked imagining myself somewhere else, someone else." "That is not silly. That is human." As night fell again, Clara realized with a start that she was enjoying herself. Despite being trapped in a church during a blizzard with no clear future, despite everything that had gone wrong, she was happy in this moment. Harrison made her laugh with stories of ranch mishaps and stubborn cattle. He listened when she talked, really listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak. When she finally lay down to sleep, she found herself wishing the storm would last just a little longer. The fifth day brought clear skies. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through the windows, the first true sun she had seen since arriving in Fort Stockton. Harrison was already up, checking his horse and preparing to dig them out. "Storm is over," he said with satisfaction. "We will head back to the ranch today. Can you ride?" "I have never been on a horse," Clara admitted. Harrison looked at her, then at his horse, then back at her. "Well, you are about to learn. Thunder here is gentle. He will not throw you." It took more than an hour to dig out the door enough to get the horse through. The snow was several feet deep in places, and the whole town looked transformed, buried under a thick white blanket. Clara gathered her few belongings and her trunk, which Harrison secured behind the saddle. "You will ride in front of me," he said, swinging easily up onto Thunder's back. "I will hold you so you do not fall." Clara was nervous, but she allowed Harrison to pull her up. She settled into the saddle in front of him, very aware of his arms on either side of her, his chest solid against her back. It was improper and intimate, and she knew she should protest, but the truth was she did not want to. The ride to the Double R Ranch took most of the day. The snow made travel slow and difficult, and they had to stop frequently to rest Thunder. Harrison talked as they rode, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the area. He had one arm around her waist to steady her, and Clara found herself leaning back against him, grateful for his warmth and presence. They saw no one else on the trail. The storm had driven everyone to shelter, and even now, the world seemed empty and silent, blanketed in white. It was beautiful in a stark way, and Clara found herself glad to see it, glad to experience this wild land even under such circumstances. "Have you thought about what you will do if Mrs. Richardson does not need help?" Harrison asked at one point. "Try somewhere else, I suppose. There must be someone in Fort Stockton who needs a cook or a seamstress. I am a fair hand with a needle." "And if there is not," Clara did not answer for a moment, "I will figure something out." "I always do. You are tougher than you look, Clara Sutton." "I have had to be." The Double R Ranch appeared as the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon. It was larger than Clara had expected, with a main house, several outbuildings, a large barn, and a bunkhouse. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and she could see cattle in the distance, dark shapes against the snow. Harrison guided Thunder to the main house and helped Clara down. Her legs were stiff and sore from the long ride, and she nearly fell. Harrison steadied her with a hand on her arm. "Wait here," he said. "I will talk to Mrs. Richardson." He was gone perhaps 10 minutes, and when he returned, he was accompanied by a tall woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair. She looked Clara up and down with an assessing gaze that missed nothing. "So you are the mail-order bride who got stranded in the church," Mrs. Richardson said. "Harrison tells me you need work." "Yes, madam. I can cook, clean, so I am a hard worker and I do not complain." Mrs. Richardson's expression softened slightly. "Harrison also tells me you burn church benches to stay alive. That shows resourcefulness. I can use someone like that. My regular cook left last month to get married, and I have been struggling to manage on my own. The hands need 3 meals a day, and it is too much for one person. I can offer you room and board plus $30 a month. That is fair wages for this area. What do you say?" $30 a month was more than Clara had made at the factory. "I say yes, madam. Thank you. Good. Harrison, show her to the spare room off the kitchen. Miss Sutton, you will start tomorrow morning. Breakfast is at 5. Clara followed Harrison to the house, which was warm and smelled of wood smoke and coffee. The room Mrs. Richardson had given her was small but clean, with a real bed and a window that looked out toward the barn. Her trunk fit in the corner, and there was even a small mirror on the wall. "This is wonderful," Clara said, running her hand over the quilt on the bed. "I cannot believe my luck." "You earned it," Harrison said from the doorway. "You survived 3 days in that church alone." Not many people could have done that. Clara turned to face him, suddenly aware that this might be goodbye. "Will I see you again? I live in the bunkhouse with the other hands. You will see me every day at meals." Relief flooded through her. "Good, that is good." Harrison smiled, a real smile this time that reached his eyes. "Get some rest, Clara Sutton. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." That night, Clara lay in her first real bed in nearly a week and thought about everything that had happened. She had come west to marry a stranger and found herself working on a ranch instead. She had nearly died in a blizzard and been saved by a cowboy with gray eyes and a gentle voice. Her life had not turned out anything like she planned, but as she drifted off to sleep, she found herself thinking that maybe, just maybe, it had turned out better. The next weeks fell into a rhythm. Clara woke before dawn to start breakfast for the ranch hands. She cooked enormous meals of eggs, bacon, beans, and biscuits, learning quickly to double the portions she thought were necessary. Cowboys, she discovered, could eat like a small army. Harrison was at every meal, and Clara found her eyes seeking him out in the crowd of men. He always sat in the same spot, at the far end of the long table, and he always thanked her for the food. Sometimes he lingered after the others had left, helping her clean up or bringing in wood for the stove. They talked during these stolen moments, sharing more of their lives and dreams. Clara learned that Harrison had a younger sister in Louisiana whom he had not seen in 10 years. He learned that Clara could speak some French, taught by her mother who had been born in Montreal. "Say something in French," Harrison requested one morning as he dried dishes. Clara blushed but complied. "Vous êtes un homme bon avec un cœur gentil." "What does that mean?" "It means you are a good man with a kind heart." Harrison looked pleased and embarrassed in equal measure. "I do not know about that." "I do. You saved my life, Harrison Maddox. I think I am a fair judge of your character." As January turned to February, the snow melted, and the ranch came back to life. Clara settled into her role, becoming friends with Mrs. Richardson and learning the rhythms of ranch life. She was content, more content than she had been in Boston, but there was a restlessness growing in her, a longing she tried not to examine too closely. The truth was she had feelings for Harrison. Real, deep feelings that grew stronger every day. The way he smiled at her across the breakfast table. The sound of his laughter, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. She was falling in love with him, had perhaps been falling in love with him since he carried her through the snow. But Harrison never said anything, never indicated he felt the same. He was kind and friendly, but nothing more. Clara began to wonder if she had imagined the connection between them, if it had been nothing more than the intensity of their shared ordeal creating false intimacy. Then came the day in late February, when Mrs. Richardson asked Clara to bring lunch out to the men working on the south fence line. She packed a basket of sandwiches and rode out on the gentle mare Mrs. Richardson kept for errands. She found the crew easily enough. 5 men, including Harrison, working to repair winter damage to the fence. They thanked her for the food and dug in with enthusiasm. Harrison ate standing next to her, leaning against the fence rail. "How are you settling in?" he asked. "Well, I think. Mrs. Richardson seems pleased with my work." "She should be. The hands certainly are. I have heard more than one man say you are the best cook this ranch has ever had." Clara laughed. "They would say that about anyone who feeds them regularly. Maybe." Harrison was quiet for a moment, looking out across the rolling hills. "Clara, I have been meaning to ask you something." Her heart started beating faster. "Yes, there is a dance in town next Saturday. A social, they call it. Most of the ranch will be going. I was wondering if you might want to go. With me. If you are not already planning to go with someone else, that is." Clara could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Are you asking me to accompany you to the dance, Harrison?" He looked nervous, which was somehow endearing on a man who had ridden through a blizzard without flinching. "I am. If you want to, if you do not, that is fine too. I just thought." "Yes," Clara interrupted. "Yes, I would love to go with you." Harrison's face broke into a huge smile. Really? Really? The other men had stopped eating and were watching with undisguised interest. One of them, a young hand named Pete, let out a whoop. "About time, Maddox. We were wondering when you were going to work up the courage." Harrison shot him a look but did not deny it. He turned back to Clara. "I will borrow a wagon. Pick you up at 6. I will be ready." The next week passed in a blur of anticipation and nerves. Mrs. Richardson, when she heard about the dance, insisted on helping Clara alter one of her old dresses, a pretty green calico that brought out the color in Clara's eyes. They worked on it in the evenings, taking in seams and adding lace at the collar. "Harrison is a good man," Mrs. Richardson said as she worked. "Steady and reliable, not much for talk, but his actions speak louder. If he asked you to the dance, it is because he has real feelings for you." "How can you be certain?" "Because I have known him for 5 years, and I have never seen him ask anyone else. He keeps to himself, does his work, minds his own business. But ever since he brought you here, there has been something different about him. He smiles more, talks more." "I would say you have had an effect on him, Miss Sutton." Clara felt warmth spreading through her chest. "I hope so, because he has certainly had an effect on me." Saturday arrived cold but clear. Clara dressed carefully, braiding her dark hair and pinning it up in a style her mother had taught her. The green dress fit perfectly, and when she looked in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. She looked happy, she realized. Truly happy. Harrison arrived promptly at 6, driving a wagon pulled by 2 horses. He had cleaned up too, Clara noticed, wearing a pressed shirt and a vest she had not seen before. His hair was still damp from washing, and he had shaved. He looked handsome and nervous, and Clara felt her heart swell with affection. "You look beautiful," Harrison said when he helped her into the wagon. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." They rode toward town in comfortable silence, the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Clara felt like she was in a good dream after so many nightmares. The dance was being held in the church, the same church where Clara had sheltered during the storm. Someone had replaced the benches she had burned, and the space was decorated with ribbons and candles. Music came from a fiddle, a guitar, and a piano that had been wheeled in for the occasion. Harrison introduced Clara to what seemed like half the county. Everyone was friendly and curious about the mail-order bride who had survived the blizzard. Several people thanked Harrison for checking on the town during the storm, and Clara learned that his ride had been even more dangerous than she realized. He had nearly frozen to death himself, had gotten lost twice, and had barely made it to Fort Stockton. "You said you knew how to read weather," she said when they finally had a moment alone. "You said you would be fine." "I said those things so you would not worry. Truth was, I was not certain I would make it, but I had to try. I could not stand the thought of people suffering if there was anything I could do to help." Clara looked at this man who had risked everything for strangers and felt her love for him deepen impossibly further. "You could have died, but I did not. I found you instead." Harrison held out his hand. "Will you dance with me, Clara?" The fiddle was playing a waltz, and Clara let Harrison lead her onto the floor. She had learned to dance from her mother, who had insisted it was an important social skill, but she had never danced with a man she loved before. Harrison held her properly, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers, and guided her through the steps with surprising grace. "You are a good dancer," Clara said. "My mother taught me. She said every man should know how to dance, even if he spends his life with cattle." They danced 3 more dances, and then Harrison led her outside for air. The night was cold but not bitter, and the stars were spectacular, spread across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "Clara," Harrison said, his voice serious, "I need to tell you something." Her heart started racing. "What is it?" I know we have only known each other a few weeks. I know that is not very long, but out here, life moves differently. When you know something, you know it. And I know that I have feelings for you, real feelings, the kind of feelings that do not go away. Clara could barely breathe. Harrison, I am not asking for anything, I just needed you to know. From the moment I saw you stumbling through that snow, half frozen and completely stubborn, refusing to give up, I felt something. And every day since, that feeling has gotten stronger. You are brave and smart and kind, and when I am with you, I feel like the best version of myself. So I just wanted you to know that. Whatever you decide to do with that information is up to you. Clara looked up at this rough, honest man who had saved her life and stolen her heart, and she knew exactly what she wanted. Harrison Maddox, I fell in love with you in that church when you shared your food with me and made me feel safe for the first time in years. I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude, just the circumstances, but I know the truth. I love you. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you make me laugh. I love how you care for your horse and help with dishes and risk your life for strangers. I love everything about you. Harrison looked stunned. You love me. I do, very much. He stepped closer, reaching up to cup her face in his work-roughened hands. Clara Sutton, may I kiss you, please? The kiss was gentle at first, tentative. But then Clara wrapped her arms around his neck and Harrison pulled her closer, and it deepened into something passionate and true. Clara felt like she was flying, like every bad thing that had ever happened to her had been worth it because it led to this moment, this man, this perfect kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison was grinning like a fool. I was so worried you did not feel the same way. I was worried about the same thing. We are a pair of fools then. The best kind of fools. They went back inside and danced until midnight, and when Harrison took Clara home, he kissed her again at the door of the ranch house, a long, sweet kiss that promised everything. The next weeks were the happiest of Clara's life. She and Harrison spent every free moment together, walking around the ranch, talking, laughing, stealing kisses when no one was looking. The other hands teased them mercilessly, but it was good-natured, and even Mrs. Richardson smiled knowingly. In March, as the prairie began to green and wildflowers started blooming, Harrison asked Clara to marry him. They were sitting by a creek on the ranch property, watching the water flow and the cattle graze in the distance. I do not have much to offer, Harrison said, holding both her hands in his. No big house, no fortune, just a small cabin and an honest living, but I promise I will spend every day of the rest of my life making you happy if you will let me. Clara Sutton, will you marry me? Clara was crying, tears of joy streaming down her face. Yes, yes, Harrison, I will marry you. He kissed her and slipped a simple gold band on her finger. It was my mother's, he explained. The only thing I have of hers, I want you to have it. I will treasure it always. They were married 3 weeks later in the same church where they had sheltered from the storm. Half the county attended, and Mrs. Richardson cried during the ceremony. The preacher spoke of God's mysterious ways and how sometimes blessings come disguised as trials. Clara wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Mrs. Richardson gave her as a wedding gift. It was simple white muslin with blue ribbons, and she felt like a princess. Harrison wore his best clothes and looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the Double R with food and music and dancing. As Clara waltzed with her new husband under the spring stars, she thought about how far she had come. She had traveled west to marry a stranger and ended up finding her true love instead. She had nearly died in a blizzard and been saved by the man who would become her everything. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison asked, his arms warm around her. "How lucky I am, how grateful." "I am the lucky one. The blizzard brought you to me. The blizzard and your courage. You rode through it for me, Harrison, when you did not even know me. Some part of me knew. Some part of me knew you were out there waiting. He kissed her forehead. Come on, wife. Let us go home. Harrison had been working on his cabin for weeks, getting it ready for Clara. It was small but solid, with a bedroom, a kitchen area, and a stone fireplace that filled the space with warmth. Clara had sewn curtains and brought her few possessions, and together they had made it into a real home. That night, their first night as husband and wife, they lay together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the prairie, and talked about their future. Harrison spoke of his dream of buying his own ranch someday, of building something permanent and lasting. Clara spoke of the children she wanted, of the family they would create together. How many children? Harrison asked, his fingers playing with her hair. As many as God sees fit to give us. At least 3 or 4. That is a good number, enough to help run a ranch, Clara laughed. You are already putting them to work. Children need purpose, but they also need love. I will give them both. He pulled her closer. I love you, Clara Maddox. I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you. You already have proven it, every single day. The next months and years unfolded like a beautiful story. Clara continued cooking for the ranch while Harrison worked his way up to foreman, proving his skill and dedication. They saved every penny they could, planning for the day when they could buy their own land. In the winter of 1884, Clara gave birth to their first child, a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Henry Thomas Maddox, and Harrison held his son with tears streaming down his weathered face. He is perfect, Harrison whispered, looking at Clara with such love it made her heart ache. You are perfect. I do not deserve this happiness. Yes, you do. You deserve every bit of it. 2 years later, their daughter was born, a tiny girl they named Rose Elizabeth. She had blonde hair and green eyes and lungs that could wake the dead when she was hungry. Henry adored his little sister, following her around and protecting her fiercely. In 1887, Harrison's dream came true. The owner of a small ranch north of the Double R decided to sell, and Harrison had saved enough for a down payment. It was only 500 acres with a modest house and barn, but it was theirs. They named it the Maddox Ranch, and Harrison built a sign for the gate that he painted himself. Clara cried when she saw their new home, this tangible proof of everything they had worked for. It was not fancy, but it was solid and clean, with room for their growing family and their growing dreams. This is just the beginning, Harrison promised her as they stood on the porch watching the sunset on their first night in their own home. I am going to build you the finest ranch in Texas. I do not need the finest ranch in Texas. I just need you. Their third child was born in 1888, another boy they named Samuel Jack. He was quiet and thoughtful, taking after Clara with her love of books and learning. Clara taught all her children to read and write, sitting with them at the kitchen table and working through lessons she created herself. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Harrison had a gift for raising cattle, for knowing which animals to breed and which to sell. He was honest in his dealings, and word spread. People trusted Harrison Maddox, and that trust turned into a solid reputation and steady business. In 1890, their fourth child arrived, a girl they named Margaret Ann. She was a spitfire from the moment she was born, demanding and stubborn and absolutely fearless. She would grow up to be able to rope a calf before most boys her age, and Harrison would joke that she had inherited her mother's survival instinct. Clara sometimes thought about the path her life had taken, the strange twists of fate that had led her to Texas and Harrison. If Thomas Whitfield had not died, if the blizzard had not trapped her, if Harrison had not been brave enough to ride through the storm, where would she be? The thought made her shudder. "What is wrong?" Harrison asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Henry was 11 now, teaching Rose and Samuel how to throw a rope. Baby Margaret toddled around, getting in everyone's way and laughing with delight. "Nothing is wrong. I was just thinking about how different my life could have been." Harrison took her hand, his thumb rubbing circles on her palm. "Things worked out the way they were meant to." "Do you really believe that? That we were meant to find each other?" "I do. I think that blizzard was the best thing that ever happened to me because it brought you into my life. Every good thing I have, every moment of happiness comes from you." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, breathing in his familiar scent of leather and hay and home. "I love you, Harrison Maddox." "I love you too, Clara, more than words can say." The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Henry grew tall and strong, becoming his father's right hand on the ranch. Rose turned into a beautiful young woman with a talent for numbers, keeping the ranch books with meticulous care. Samuel went away to school in Austin, becoming a teacher just like Clara had hoped. Margaret married a neighboring rancher's son and stayed close, raising her own family just a few miles away. Harrison's hair turned gray at the temples, and Clara's hands developed calluses from years of work, but their love never faded. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared experience and mutual respect. They had built a life together from nothing, survived hardship and celebrated triumph, and through it all, they had each other. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1905, Harrison surprised Clara with a gift, a photograph. It showed them standing in front of their ranch house, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Margaret had 3 children by then, and Rose had just announced she was expecting her first. "So we remember," Harrison said, handing her the framed image. "So we never forget where we came from and what we built together." Clara looked at the photograph, at the life captured in that frozen moment, and felt overwhelming gratitude. She was 53 years old now, no longer the desperate young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach into a snowstorm. She was a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a rancher. She was happy. "I could never forget," Clara said, reaching for Harrison's hand. "Every day with you has been a gift." That night, they sat together on the porch as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to build. Harrison's arm was around her shoulders, and Clara leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Do you ever think about that blizzard?" Clara asked. "Sometimes. I think about how scared I was riding through it. I think about finding you in that church, half frozen and burning benches to stay alive. I think about how close we came to never meeting at all. But you rode through it anyway. You risked your life. Best decision I ever made." Harrison kissed the top of her head. "You were worth it, Clara. You were worth every second of fear, every moment of doubt. I would ride through 1,000 blizzards to find you." Clara felt tears in her eyes, happy tears this time. "I am so glad you did. I am so glad you were brave enough to ride through the storm for me." "Always," Harrison said. "I would do it again in a heartbeat. You are my home, Clara. You always have been." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out one by one, filling the vast Texas sky. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the sounds of cattle lowing and horses moving in the barn. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. This was their life, the life they had built together from courage and love and sheer determination. It had not been easy. There had been droughts and cattle diseases, financial troubles and personal losses. But they had faced everything together, hand in hand, heart to heart. Inside the house, Clara could hear the sounds of their family. Henry was reading a story to his younger siblings, his voice deep and warm like his father's. The children's laughter floated out through the open windows, sweet as music. "We did well, didn't we?" Clara said softly. "We did better than well. We did wonderfully." Harrison stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, love. Let us go inside. Our family is waiting." Clara took his hand, this man who had saved her life and given her everything worth having, and let him pull her to her feet. Together they walked into their home, into the warm glow of lamplight and the sound of their children's voices, into the life they had created together. Years later, when Clara was an old woman with silver hair and age-spotted hands, she would tell her grandchildren the story of how she met their grandfather. She would tell them about the blizzard that trapped her in a church, about the cowboy brave enough to ride through it to check on strangers, about falling in love with a man who showed her what true courage looked like. The grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, asking questions and begging her to tell the story again. And Clara would smile and start from the beginning. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the weathered general store just as the first snowflakes began to fall. Harrison would sit beside her, holding her hand just as he had held it for nearly 50 years, and when she reached the part about him riding through the storm, he would squeeze her fingers and she would squeeze back, a silent conversation that needed no words. They had lived a good life, a full life, rich with love and family and purpose. They had built something real and lasting, not just a ranch but a legacy. Their children were happy and successful, their grandchildren healthy and bright. Everything they had dreamed of that first night in Harrison's cabin had come true and more. On a warm summer evening in 1923, Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep with Clara beside him. He was 70 years old and had lived every single one of those years with purpose and integrity. His last words to Clara were the same words he had spoken to her countless times before. "I love you, always." Clara held his hand and whispered back, "I love you too. Thank you for riding through the storm for me." She lived 3 more years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories and teaching the youngest ones to read just as she had taught their parents. When she died in the spring of 1926, her last thoughts were of Harrison, of that first kiss in the snow, of a life well lived, and a love that transcended everything. They buried her next to Harrison on the hill overlooking the ranch, under the wide Texas sky they had both loved so much. The headstones were simple. Harrison Maddox, beloved husband and father, and Clara Maddox, beloved wife and mother. But the true monument to their love was all around them. The ranch that still bore their name, the children and grandchildren who carried their legacy, the story of courage and devotion that would be passed down through generations. In the end, Clara had gotten exactly what she had come west seeking: a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that lasted forever. The blizzard that should have killed her had instead given her life, real life, the kind that matters. And the cowboy who rode through that blizzard had given her everything else. Their story became legend in Fort Stockton, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But to the family that descended from them, it was simply the truth. That love can be found in the most unexpected places. That courage is sometimes measured in a willingness to ride through storms for strangers, and that the greatest adventures often begin with the worst disasters. The Maddox Ranch still stands today, passed down through the generations, a testament to what 2 people can build when they have love, determination, and each other. And sometimes, on winter nights when the wind howls and snow begins to fall, people swear they can see 2 figures on the porch of the old ranch house, standing close together, watching the storm and remembering a blizzard that changed everything.